Oh, I see the participant number going up. So
Hello.
thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Shall I stop sharing or keep the share
No,
open?
go ahead and stay as you are. Yeah,
Okay, that's
that's
fine.
great. I'll just have you advance the slides when we really get started.
Lovely.
Welcome, everybody. Please pop into the chat and tell us where you're joining from and what you're looking forward to getting out of today's session. What induced you to join for this awesome session with Crystal Carter.
Thank you so much for joining me. I do love talking about tech SEO, and it's fortunate to have a space to do that. So thank you, Deep Crawl, for the opportunity yet again. And lots of people joining from all over the place: Philippines, New York.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Very
And I hope to
exciting.
keep this energy going in the chat, interacting with us, the hosts and speaker, and with each other. This is a fruitful topic, and excited for us to dive into it. I'm going to give everyone just 30 more seconds, and then I'll give a little bit of logistics, and then introduce our speaker and tee it off for you, Crystal.
Yeah, fantastic. That sounds really, really good.
Okay. Well, something that everyone always asks at the beginning of the webinar is whether it's being recorded and whether the slides will be shared afterwards. And yes, it is being recorded, and everyone who registered will get a link to the recording within a couple of days after we're complete here. As I said, please feel free to comment and interact in the chat. I'll be active there throughout Crystal's remarks. And then if you have specific questions, use the Q&A function at the bottom to send those in. I will curate them, and we'll have time at the end to tee a few up for Crystal to handle here live. The plan for today is to give you some strategies for taking the output of a site audit and turning it into a prioritized list of high impact fixes. A question that I hear often is, there's a lot of errors and warnings flagged by this crawl. How do I know where to start? How do I know which of these actions I can take that's going to impact my business bottom line? And our speaker, Crystal Carter, has put together a really actionable set of guidelines and reminders that are going to help make sure you're getting usable and accurate data out of your audit, and isolating the root causes for issues so you know where you can make the most benefit, and then how to narrow down from there what fixes are going to matter most depending on what your business outcomes are. So I'm really excited for this, Crystal. A little bit more about our speaker. Crystal Carter is the head of SEO communications for Wix, which is a cloud-based website development platform with over 200 million users. No pressure. She has more than 15 years of experience in digital marketing and SEO, and she's a prolific contributor to our industry, a speaker, a writer, a community member. As far as SEO audits go, Crystal loves the detailed work of internal link hygiene on e-commerce sites. So thank you. Somebody has to do it. In preparing for today's session, Crystal told me that her most memorable SEO audit was the one I think many of us can relate to, which is the one that almost overheated the laptop to an infinite redirect loop. So hopefully the audits you prepared for us to walk through today didn't cause any hardware damage. And then finally, on a more personal note, Crystal, you have a knack for creating unique pop culture references that help complex SEO concepts really resonate. So your SEO model is all killer, no filler, and that's
Yes.
exactly what we're in store for today. So thank you, and let's dive in.
That's a fantastic introduction. Thank you so much, Anne. So today I'm going to be talking to you about maximizing how to prioritize your SEO audits for maximum impact. And this is something that as Anne discussed, this is something that comes up a lot. Like, you can find lots and lots of issues, but people don't really know necessarily what to do with them or which things to action first. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about now. So I get there. Right. So we've done the introductions, and first we're going to talk about why SEO audits are so important, how you can identify what matters, and how to prioritize what matters. So just quickly, I'm Crystal Carter. I've had that introduction, but again, I work for Wix. We serve 200 million users worldwide. And also we have a great integration with Deep Crawl, which is available. So just to let you know, that's one of the things we've been working on. There's a great webinar about how that works as well, which there's a link to it in the production. So first, we're going to talk about why SEO audits are important. And this is just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and so that we all know the same thing we're talking about. I'm sure I don't have to convince you that SEO audits are important, but just so that we're all on the same page. When I'm generally approaching an SEO audit, one of the things that I'm looking at is to make sure that I understand at scale how bots and users are experiencing the website. So I think that you can do a content audit that can sort of give you information about keyword research and that sort of information. But the technical SEO audit can show you things that you cannot see just by doing keyword research. You can't see just by looking at the analytics necessarily. Can give you it lets you look under the hood to understand exactly how bots are using it, and to help you understand how users are interpreting it, even in ways that they don't necessarily understand. Like users might not know that there's a security difference. There's a difference in the server security between their system and your system, or like whatever. But with a technical SEO audit, you can understand that sort of thing. So I love tech SEO audits for this reason. And when I'm doing tech SEO audits, I tend to look for a few things. I tend to take a crisp approach. So I look at crawlability, rendering, indexability, security, and performance. And there are lots of things that are covered across the tech SEO audit, but these things tend to be the ones that I will look at as a priority. You might have a different set for you. So for instance, like interconnectivity, for instance, if you're working with a website that has like lots of apps and lots of different surface ways that people surface your content, that might also be something that is valuable for you. But this one, I tend to find these few points tend to be quite important for most sites. So crawlability is all about how websites are being crawled. Rendering has to do with how the content is rendered. Indexability, about indexing, security, performance, etc. So when we're thinking about the crawl, we're trying to understand how content is discovered and prioritized. So if you have issues here, if for instance you have parts of your site that aren't being crawled in the way that you would expect them to be, then you'll have a difficulty making sure that those are indexed as well. So it's important to think to make sure that you are seeing when things are being crawled, how they're being crawled, how often they're being crawled, so that you can think about what needs to be actioned there. So when I'm thinking about the crawl, I tend to think, is the right content being crawled in the expected manner? So you don't necessarily need everything to be crawled all the time, but you need to make sure that what you want to be crawled is being crawled in the way that you would expect it to. So for instance, if you have with it, and this is a screenshot from the Deep Crawl audit tool, you can see that there's a lot of content that is further on this, and this is a small site that I audited, but you can see that there's a lot of content that's at the crawl depth of 5 and 6. For instance, so 5 and 6 layers down the website. Now, if I've got content that's that far back, but it's actually really important, I should probably think about moving that forward. So an audit might tell you that the audit might not even flag that it's wrong, but it'll tell you information about that you can action there. And think about rendering. Checks can show if certain pages have inconsistencies between the code and the client-side rendered page. This can vary between bots, browsers, devices, all sorts of things. So what you're looking at here is whether or not the content is being rendered in a consistent and expected manner. So this is particularly important for people who are working with like progressive web apps and single page applications, multi-page applications, anything that's very JavaScript heavy in particular is going to need to think about this a lot. But and this even applies to people who are using page builders, for instance. You're going to need to think about this as well. And there's a few different tools that you can use to assess this. Again, this is from Deep Crawl's tool, and it helps you to understand whether or not what is in the code is actually what Chrome is seeing, for instance. And sometimes you can have errors here where there's a menu that's being rendered, or that's in the code but isn't being rendered, but is causing a 404 in a different part of the site. So making sure that it's being rendered consistently is something that's really important. Indexability audits can tell you which content is most accessible for search engines, and which content is being prioritized by search engines. Again, you cannot rank if you are not indexed. They're not the same thing. I sometimes like to describe this as the difference between sort of being so for instance, if you were a pop star, you getting played on the radio is like being indexed, but ranking is different. Ranking is like being top of the charts. That's a different thing. You can't be top of the charts if you're never played on the radio, but you need to be played, but it does help. So these are things to think about. So with indexability, you want to make sure that your priority content is indexable, and that any supplementary content is strategically managed. And when I say supplementary content, this is a term that I'm using, but what I mean by that is like things like pagination pages or category pages, or sort of service pages like thank you pages and things like that. Those are bits of content that you may decide may need to be indexed. You may decide they don't need to be indexed, but you need to be managing them strategically, and you need to have a plan for them. So just leaving them to just sort of to just sort of be unmanaged can cause issues with your crawl budget if you're not careful. And it's less of an issue for smaller sites, but for bigger sites, it's definitely something that should be managed. So when you're looking at your audit, it's important to understand how that's being rolled out, and how that's impacting you on the server. When you think about security, I always check security settings on websites for technical audits, and the reason why is because it touches on site-wide elements, and often security is an indication of the health of your server configurations, and also security can lead to quick wins, and also can lead to like quick issues, as it were. So if you have, for instance, if you don't have HTTPS on your site, and then you add HTTPS on your site, that can see big improvements in speed and lots of other things, and lots of connectivity. So you want to make sure that any security issues that you have across your site are being resolved, and you make sure that they're not causing you sort of site-wide challenges, because you can have parts of the site that have different security from other parts of the site, which can sometimes make sites slower, and there's lots of other things like that. So the Deep Crawl app will give you lots of information about security. And this particular screenshot is from one section of it that's just talking about HTTPS, but there's lots of other information that you can understand from your security, about your security audit from a Deep Crawl audit. Finally, when I think about performance, so if performance reviews should reveal opportunities to improve speed, page experience, and core web vitals. And this can be important for users and for rankings. It should also be really important for conversion rates. So with conversion, there's a lot of stats around how users having to wait for more than 3 seconds can have a big impact on whether or not they stay on a site. And so it's really important to make sure that you're able to deliver a good page experience with regards to performance for your site. DeepCrawl has some great information around how sites are performing for core web vitals and for page speed, and you should be looking at this information with the idea of identifying the different ways that you could improve page experience for your most important content, and I'll get to a little bit more around that. So these are the kinds of things that would generally make tech SEO audits really important. So once you've done that, how do you identify what actually matters, though? So it's really important to think about a few things, and over the years, I've identified these. So first of all, you need to know your tools, and second of all, you need to know your site. Thirdly, you need to check the whole crawl, and finally, I would say you need to cross-reference your findings. So this is the first step with identifying what matters. So when I say know your tools, it's important to understand what the capabilities are of your auditing tool. So again, we're looking at deep crawl here. There are, like, if you're thinking about Chrome, it's like Chrome dev tools, or if you're thinking about the rich results testing tool, or if you're thinking about schema markup validators, things like that, it's important to know what are the capabilities and what are the limitations of the particular tool. And so for instance, this is a crawl of a small website with the AMP settings enabled. So within deep crawl, you can change around which specific criteria you want to crawl, and on this particular one, I set it so that it would crawl the AMP settings. Then I set it again where I excluded the AMP settings, and you can see that it's the same site with the same content, but it's pulling out different results. So it's very important to understand which settings are most optimal for the issue that you're trying to investigate. So make sure that you understand your tools and what they're capable of. So for instance, within deep crawl, this is a screenshot of how many URLs you can crawl within their particular tool. I've seen other tools where they have a default where it's set to, and I think the deep crawl default is set to about 1,000 URLs, but I've seen it before where it's set to 100. And sometimes you can set your audit tool to crawl 100 pages, and then at the end it comes back and says, "Oh yeah, it's 100%. There's 0 errors. Nothing to do here. Pat yourself on the back and keep it moving." But that's probably incorrect. That's probably not a full screenshot or a full audit of what's actually needed. So make sure that you understand the depth of your crawl and the settings that are available. So things that can change audit results include, like, the number of pages crawled, for instance, the Kite's parameter exclusion. So for instance, like if you have a big e-commerce site, then you might have different things within your crawl that might need to be that you might have certain pages that you don't necessarily need to have all the UTM things crawled. Pagination exclusions, that might be something you want to think about. Whether or not you have JavaScript enabled or disabled on your crawl will change what shows up within your information. The user agent. So again, within deep crawl, you can change which user agent you're using. So you can crawl via desktop, or you can crawl via mobile, or you can crawl via Firefox or Chrome or Safari, or these sorts of different things. And also your connectivity to different tools and APIs. So for instance, within deep crawl, you can see how you're performing within Search Crawl or Search Console. But if you're not connected to Search Console, then it'll say that you don't have any URLs on Search Console, but you probably do. So just make sure that you know how your tool works and how everything is configured there. And Anne, were you wanting to jump in on that, or are you okay?
No, just nodding.
Just nodding. Good.
with the UI and how much critical thinking has to go into this stage of setting the audit up and interpreting it even before you dive into reviewing the reports. So
yes, absolutely. And it's worth comparing the two. So comparing the two reports between, like, when you set up one configuration and when you set up another configuration. Another thing that's great about deep crawl is that you can compare your crawls and you can compare the progress on them. And you can also look back at snapshots from crawls before. So yeah, it's really important to think about that. Another one I say, and it might seem really obvious, but make sure you know your site. So this screenshot here on the left is something that most marketers have probably seen, which is the marketing technology. It's like the MarTech landscape image, and it's basically like a bunch of different tools and plugins and APIs and scripts and things that people are using in MarTech. And these can impact your site and can show up and cause issues, particularly around performance, or for instance, for your site. So for instance, if you're using something like HubSpot, or if you have a TripAdvisor widget, or if you have if you have a ticketing tool that you use that's embedded on your website that's really important to your overall business activity, which a lot of businesses do. Even smaller businesses have a lot of interdependent apps and marketing tools. Then it's important to know where those things are, where they're important, and how they might show up in a crawl or might affect a page. So for instance, if you have something like Hotjar on your site, no, like that's a CR, or that is a CRO tracking tool that will have an impact on your page experience, and on your site speed audit, for instance. And you can look all over the page, but if you're not understanding that actually there's Hotjar in your tag manager settings, for instance, then you might not know what you need to do. So make sure that you understand your site, and uses of subdomains, for instance. So some people will have their blog on a subdomain. Some people will have a recruitment site, and they'll have the jobs will all be on a subdomain, for instance. That's something that's really important to think about. Use of AMP, which again, if you're working on desktop and you're auditing, you might not know that the site has app that the site is using AMP, and that could be something that's really important. So make sure that you're thinking about these different things. Multiple sitemaps is another one, and also reliance on JavaScript and third-party dependencies. So make sure that you have an idea of what of your overall tech footprint before you deep dive into your audit, and before you start to prioritize, and as you start to prioritize, because it might be that you're seeing like a big issue, but it might be for, like, let's say it's for some bit of martech that nobody's using anymore. Well, that's fine, we can just delete that. That's that's a quick win, for instance. But these are things that you need to think about. And the other thing I would say is that you should check the whole crawl. So this is something that can save you a little bit of time. So for instance, I did a crawl for deep crawl, and Morty Oberstein let me crawl his site and use it for this particular event. And on that, I found that we had a couple of pages that were getting flagged for non-indexable pages, and I could go through each individual one and change those particular URLs, redirect those individual URLs, or I could have a quick overview of the whole crawl and realize actually this error is showing up a bunch of times in the same way, and I could just go to the bulk group redirect and update that way, and then I can roll back and do, pick up any individual things that are left over from that particular thing. So sometimes what can happen is that you can see, when you see the crawl overall, you can see that actually there are dependencies within one issue or another, and they're not actually individual errors, they're systemic issues. And if you're able to do that, then you can save yourself a little bit of time, and save yourself a little bit of a headache. And you can also just be more efficient about the way that you're prioritizing what you do. And sometimes the systemic issues can even be people. So it could be that you've got lots of people who are copying and pasting the same link from somewhere else, and they keep forgetting the HTTPS link. So I've seen this a lot, where, like, particularly from client side, they're doing internal linking, and they've done a great job doing the internal linking, but they're using the HTTP link instead of the HTTPS link, for instance, and then it's showing up as like a redirect and when actually you just need people to like stop doing that. And you can say, hello everyone, like, please stop doing that, so that we can not have that issue. So just think about that. So make sure you're looking at the whole crawl overall before you start jumping in with your actions. And the other thing I would say is cross-reference your findings. So you can do this for a few reasons. So sometimes, for instance, if you were looking to validate structured data, for instance, which I don't have the screenshot here, but DeepCrawl has fantastic structured data validating information. And if you were to look on Google's rich result testing tool, they don't validate all of the structured data there. For instance, they will validate what they care about, but they won't validate everything. If you go to validator.schema.org, for instance, they will validate everything. So make sure that you're cross-referencing your findings. So on this particular one, this is an example of the performance overview dashboard within DeepCrawl. And this one gives you information on time to interactive, which is great. It tells you that these pages have good time to interactive. This one has average. This one has slow. That's all good. So that tool is telling you how many pages you need to address. within the Wix dashboard, we have a page speed, a site speed audit for this. So this is within the CMS, which also tells us how long it takes. So this is giving you two bits of information about the same issue that helps you to get better performance out of your overall information. So make sure that you are using multiple tools, not only to get a fuller picture, but also to get different insights. So yeah, these are things that are really, really, really useful when you're trying to figure out whether or not something is an issue, how much of it is an issue, and whether or not and how you should proceed next. So now we get to how to prioritize what matters. And I hope everyone's still with me. So when we're thinking about prioritizing, we need to think about a few things. So I tend to look at the top pages first, and I'll explain what that means. Then I also want to look at Google Search Console and what they're saying there. And I also think that we need to consider our channels. So when I say top pages, what a top page is will depend on what your business is, what the website is, what you're trying to do. But DeepCrawl has a really good tool within their audit called Deep Rank, which is actually really accurate. So Deep Rank, there's a link there to how they calculate it, but they look at a number of different factors. One of them is how many links are coming into that page, and this is actually very similar to how Google understands whether or not a page is really valuable. And this is something that we think about with lots of different things. So for instance, if you think about a book, or like if you were thinking about academics, if lots of people are referencing the same book, you would go, well, that book must be important because lots of people are referencing it. And if nobody's referencing, then people would say, well, I guess it's not that important. So this is the same way with pages. So for instance, on this particular one, again, thank you, Morty Everstein, for letting me use your web page. But on this particular one, the page that DeepCrawl identified as the most important, based on all of the links and a lot of other signals coming from the internal linking, was the SEO podcasts episodes page, which actually isn't the homepage. It is the podcast page with their episodes, and then it's got the homepage as second. And this actually and this is really, really interesting. So they're telling us that in that way that's the most important pages. And then we're also have information from Search Console, which is showing us similar information. So this is looking at a snapshot for the last 3 months. And I think the deep crawl one was looking at it from that particular time. But again, if you run your crawl over a period of time, it might change from one day to the next. But you can see that they're both still in the top 5. So these two top pages are both still in the top, whether you look at this tool or whether you look at that tool. So that gives you an idea that these are top pages. And similarly, if we look in the Wix Analytics, we're also seeing a similar thing. So we're seeing like general pages, not just organic. We're also seeing we're also getting some signals that these are top pages. So what makes a top page is important to you, but generally speaking, if it's a commercial business, if the general intent for the website is commercial, then the top pages will be the pages that have like high conversion rate, high lead generation, and are generally like generating a lot of revenue. You should look after those in particular. If those pages are having a lot of errors, are having a lot of issues, are slow, are poor security, anything like that, then you should make sure that those pages are being addressed, and they should be higher up the queue. Additionally, you also want to think about high traffic pages with regards to core web vitals again, and page speed. So page speed, core web vitals, they're both ranking factors. These are both things that contribute to your rankings. So for instance, if you have high traffic pages and you're having a core web vitals challenges, like let's say you've got a low page experience score and you want to improve that, go for the high traffic pages first, because it's a numbers game. So within that, you need to make sure that 75% of your users are having a good page experience. Well, if 75% of your users are going to 4 pages or 5 pages, do those pages first. Worry about the other pages later. Do the first 5 pages first, and you'll get further along the line than you would if you were trying to do every single page. You can get to the other pages later, but focus on the high priority pages there. And then the other thing you want to think about is your top ranking pages. So if you have top ranking pages that are ranking really well, they got loads of feature snippets, they've got they're showing image pack, local pack, all of that sort of stuff. if those are really high value, high ranking pages, then make sure that they stay error free and they're looking, they're performing as well as they can, because those pages can have a knock-on effect for your wider experience. I was talking to someone about this the other day, particularly about internal linking, and I just thought this was fantastic. I don't say so myself, but the way I was saying about high ranking pages is you should think about them like nachos. Like if you've ever had nachos and you get all of the cheese on the top chips, and then underneath you have underneath you have chips that don't have any cheese. You want to use your high ranking pages to like provide cheese for the other chips. So make sure that you've got your high ranking pages are performing really, really well, so that everything is delicious. So now the other thing you want to think about is about Google Search Console. And the reason why you want to think about Google Search Console is because if if you're having errors in Google Search Console, that means Google's seen it. They found you out. And that means that it may already be might already be affecting your rankings. If you have an error that happened yesterday, then you probably have time to fix it before it affects your rankings. But if you have if you have an error that is showing up in your site audit and it's showing up in Google Search Console, then you should prioritize that and action that as soon as you possibly can, because it's already having some issues. I'm like getting a lot of love for the nacho reference there. Fantastic. So the other thing that's really important about this is that it can sometimes take time to validate a fix. So again, I talked about performance a lot. I love core vital fixes, but those can take 28 days to fix. And sometimes, for instance, if you have a big website and the error that Google Search Console is finding affects like a whole folder, like let's say it's affecting like all of your product pages and Google has flagged like 200 of your product pages, they're going to take their time and go through loads of those before they validate that. So these ones so any errors that you're finding within your audit and also on Google Search Console should be prioritized as a matter of course, because again, they're probably already affecting your ranking and because they need to be updated. The other thing you're going to need to think about is the fact that like Google's requirement might be unique to Google. So for instance, you might have perfectly valid structured data with one type of like for instance with like author pages or with product pages, and then Google might change what they consider to be valid. They might say, well, we don't want it to be author anymore. We want it to be person. And you're like, well, does that really make any difference? They're like, well, we think it does. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll just change that now. Shall I? Okay. So make sure that make sure that your audit and your Google Search Console are working together. And I think that's definitely something that I look forward to. And then I would also say you should be thinking about your channels. And when I say channels here, I'm thinking about channels from a point of view of like social or paid or organic or referrals, but also thinking about things like mobile or even screen free, and sometimes we can even think about international for this, for instance. So you want to be making sure that you're aligning your audits with your campaigns and your channels. So for instance, if you're really, really big on mobile and let's say you're getting a lot of traffic from AMP, I've mentioned AMP a few times, but because the audit that I had pulled that up a few times, but if you're getting a lot of traffic through that way, then you need to be thinking about that a lot. If you have some people run campaigns where they keep the campaign activity on a subdomain. So for instance, I've seen people where they have like landingpage.domain.com. I've seen it where people have like offer.domain.com. That sort of thing. You might want to think about, you need to think about those as well, especially if people are putting money towards it. So if somebody's putting money towards like a landingpage.domain.com, for instance, and it's got glitches and people can't get through to it, or there's problems on it, then that's you're losing money that you've spent. So these are things that you should be thinking about. And again, with you should also be considering campaigns. So for instance, if you have something like Black Friday or something that's coming up, and you need to get those pages so that they're performing well, and that they can handle the kind of traffic, and that they're not glitchy. If you have a campaign that's coming up, you should also think about making sure that those pages are performing well as well. So I would say that those can sometimes move something up the queue. So consider that. And also, you're going to want to audit for new features as they are added. So something that you see a lot of times is that someone will use a third-party tool to add more functionality to a website. So for instance, if somebody is looking to add like say live chat, that can have some impact on the wider site with regard to speed. It can sometimes have impacts with regards to like security considerations and things like that. So if there are technical considerations that should be made in order to add new functionality using a third-party tool or other things, then you should audit that as it's added, and also like schedule to audit it a little while after it's added. So once you've got some user data to assess what's happening there as well. So consider your channels, and consider the business priorities of the activity that you're doing, and that can sometimes move something up the dev queue with regards to importance. And then from that, I would say lather, rinse, repeat. So monitor your progress. This is something that DeepCrawl is rolling out, where they're advertising that you can monitor what you're doing. And yeah, you do need to monitor it ongoing. So make sure that you're monitoring your activity. And so anything that you've prioritized, like your priorities, as I said, can change when you're doing, depending on different campaigns, depending on different activities, depending on new technologies. And so you need to monitor that progress all the time to make sure that everything is performing as it should, and also to identify new opportunities, and to identify new things that break, because there's a lot of moving parts on any given website, even a small one, and it's important to stay on top of that. And that's my best advice.
Thank you, Crystal. You have provided a lot of food for thought. I'm going
And
to
not
let
just
you.
nachos.
Maybe food is on my mind right now because of the crisps anagram and the nachos analogy. I'm going to give you a second to pause and catch your breath, and maybe get a sip of water, and talk through a quick summary of the main takeaways that I gathered, and then we'll pivot into some fantastic questions that were submitted. So I love the way that you structured this from step one, before you even get to reading the output of your crawl and attempting to prioritize the actions, is knowing your site and making sure your crawl is configured to give you accurate insights. So thank you for taking that 10,000-foot view and anchoring us in the crawl configuration is essential to the quality of the data. You've also highlighted that we shouldn't bank all of our interpretation on the output of one auditing tool, that it's important to go and validate with external tools that have specific expertise in a particular area, if it's Core Web Vitals, if it's structured data, to help understand and validate the findings that are being highlighted in an auditing tool. That understanding the requirements for specific SERP features that you're targeting, or specific search engines that you're attempting to perform for, or high value devices, all of that will be a lens through which both to configure your crawl and to interpret the results of your crawl when prioritizing where to take action and which warnings you can ignore. And then in terms of your rubric for the ways to prioritize the audit findings, you talked to us about when to prioritize pages with high traffic and high conversions, and when pages with high ranking can also be an important place to pay attention, even if those aren't the ones that are getting the most clicks or the ones that are driving the most current bottom line. campaign timing, recent site changes, feature launches, or particularly when adding any new piece of third-party integration. All different considerations to use when prioritizing where to look and how to configure an audit. So thank you. This is super useful. We will be sharing the recording and doing a summary write-up of your remarks as well and sharing that out. So I want to take advantage of you being here to get your intake on a couple of questions. We have one
Absolutely.
from Nigel. He asks, how do you apply the human user experience lens when you're reviewing the results of a technical SEO audit? You know, the disadvantage of a technical SEO audit is it's showing you how a machine is going to view your site. How do you apply the human user experience lens when you're looking at these results? And do you think it's pertinent?
Yeah, so I think that wherever possible, try to replicate what a user might actually be experiencing, and I think that that's the case for like all the time. I think one of the things I recently wrote an article on how to analyze algorithm update impacts, and I always say look at the SERP, and people are like, oh, I have this tool. I'm like, yeah, but like sometimes Google will put and a 3D AR lion on the SERP, and that's not going to show up on your tool. So sometimes you have to look, and I think that depending on the query, like try wherever possible to try to replicate that user experience. So go to the page, look at the page with your eyes, with your actual eyeballs, and look at the page and see what you see there. See if you can see the broken links or the empty image. See how log in using 4G, 5G, or whatever, and see how long it takes you to actually get on the page. If it says that there's an issue with Safari and your Android, find somebody with an iPhone and have them look it up for you. So I would say that we are humans, I hope, unless we're speaking to bots, but we're all humans. So I think that where possible, try to put yourself in the user's position, and that will give you insights for that. So anything that's to do with page speed, you can generally replicate that. Anything that's to do with indexability, you can generally get an idea from the SERP. So for instance, like you can go like there's a few search operators that you can use, and I cannot remember them off the top of my head. I think it's site. If you do like site and then the site link, you can see the one. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Brendan. You do site and then you do the site link, and you can see which pages are in your index. So for instance, if you have we get this a lot with people who have just set up a new website, and they go, oh, my page isn't on Google, and I I'm not ranking on Google, and I go, yeah, you are, like, or it's like, you are on Google, and I'll pop in, put site search operator, and then it'll say that there's 2 pages that are on Google. And it won't have the other pages. And then I go to the 2 pages that are on Google, and I see that they have no internal linking on those pages to any other pages. And that's the reason why they're not on that. So, try to replicate the user journey, try to replicate what users might be experiencing based on the information that you have. And yeah, that's what I would say.
I think that's really great. Personally, I'm a huge fan of ONSERP analysis. So I think it's a great reminder to go out there and do the full journey from the search through to the actual reported error on multiple devices. Especially because with mobile SERPs changing, particularly in the shopping space, I mean, there's some crazy wonky stuff that could be impacting the data, and understanding whether this is an error on your site or something that has occurred in the layer between your site.
Oh,
And so I think that's a really great call out and a
yeah.
thoughtful way to answer that question.
Yeah.
So we have another question in here that pertains to the C and the I in your CRISP rubric, crawlability and indexability. When a site has a number of URLs labeled in Google Search Console as crawled, not indexed, discovered, not indexed, how would you recommend approaching an audit to look for opportunities to get more priority pages indexed?
Yeah, so I did a talk on this at London Search or London Search XL in the autumn because like I always hate that because it's like you spend years on your like putting together all these blogs and like working really hard on this page and you're like, hey Google, I've got this page, and they're like, you're like, do you want to rank this? And they're like, we've seen it. And you're like, but what? And you're like, and they're just totally uninterested. You're like, we saw it. And you're like, do you see it? Did you like it? They're like, nah. And they, and they just keep it moving and they don't pay any attention to you. And I find it heartbreaking. And I think that there's a couple of things that you can do with that. So first of all, and I've had to do this before. So first of all, you can extract all of those URLs which are discovered and not indexed. It's not uncommon to have a lot of URLs which are discovered and not indexed. Sometimes it's a really good, it's a signal of a very healthy marketing campaign. So for instance, like you don't necessarily need every PPC landing page to be indexed. You probably don't want that because it would be eating up your crawl budget. Like, and so that's not necessarily what you want. But Google's probably seeing them because people may be linking to them, people are coming to them, people like all of that sort of stuff. That's fine. But so what's really important that you extract all of those URLs and have a look at them. Like again, look at them with your eyeballs and then see which ones are ones which are actually in your sitemap and which ones are some, because sometimes it can be legacy links. So sometimes they can be links from years ago from the site before you did the rebuild. And again, they might not be pages that you need to worry about, but if they are pages that are from your current website and that you actually do want traffic to, then there's a few things that you can do with them. Again, the deep crawl deep rank metric was showing the signals that they're getting, and based on the kinds of algorithms that Google are using to tell them which pages are most important. So it would be worth, again, cross-referencing this data. So have a look at the URLs which are discovered and not indexed, and are actually pages that you actually want people to come to, and also have a look at the pages and also have a look at the deep rank pages and compare what the numbers are. So for instance, if you have a page which is a low, which you think is an important page, but the deep rank score that you're getting is like 2, then you probably need to do more internal linking. And you can do more internal linking in a few different ways. So for instance, you could think about the way your menu is working. You can think about HTML sitemaps. You can think, which some people there's jury can be out on HTML sitemaps. That's your own decision, but it is a tool. And you can also think about like RSS and a few other things as well. So make sure that you're giving all of the content that you need to a fighting chance. Another one that's a really good thing, for instance, is to have like latest content on your homepage. So for instance, if you have a jobs page, it's good to have a feed of the latest jobs on the homepage. The homepage gets crawled more times than almost any other page on any site, almost consistently. And so it's a really good way of taking some of those pages that are sort of a lower crawl depth and giving them a little bit of time to shine in the first instance, so that you can help them with the index. Another one that's good, particularly for local businesses, is Google Business Profile. This is a little bit of a hack or whatever, but the Google Business Profile, if you use their posting tools, anyone who clicks from one of those Google Business Profile links, it counts as organic. So it is in the index because you put it in the index. So that's something that is usable. And I know that there's a lot of people who are from bigger companies that use deep crawl, but you can actually do that at scale in a number of different ways. So there are a few different tools that you can use for helping to discover and not index. But generally speaking, if you have content that's discovered and not indexed and you want it indexed, then you should help it to be indexed. Like, don't just rely on Google. Get out there and get that content out. So I would say improve your content distro would make a really big difference.
I think the key and the part that's often difficult with clients is to say you have to pick something to not be indexed in order to free up some room for what you think is most important.
Yeah.
So picking your favorite baby, never easy.
Well,
Um,
it's very interesting because there's a lot of people who have parts of the site which are like not really, they don't really need to be indexed, like and that's okay. They don't need to be in the, or they do, they don't need to be in the site map, and that's okay. And normally if you go through your links, you can tidy some of those up. So for instance, a lot of people use a lot of tags for and categories for blogs and for e-commerce and stuff like that. You probably don't need a category for every single thing. Like you don't need one of the things I see a lot of times is people will have will try to do too much with their categories. So they'll have like a category for shoe and a category for shoes, and you don't need a category for shoe and shoes. You just need one category for shoes, and that's fine. And you cut down some of those pages, then you free up some of the crawl budget. And again, all killer no filler. Don't waste Google's time with pages that they don't need to crawl.
Awesome. So we have a couple of quick additional slides to swing through. There's been a lot of fruitful discussion and lots of questions. We haven't been able to address them all, but we're just grateful that everyone took the time to engage. And Crystal, thank you so very much for taking the time to put together this really valuable approach to a very common question. And looking forward to hearing from folks. If there's questions that we didn't get to, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to continue the conversation offline.
Thank you so much.